Okay, so in the last lecture, we saw that what are the advantages of using a transformer in a DC to DC converter, right? So you can use a transformer in DC to DC converter to gain certain advantage, or in other words, what were the limitations of the DC converters which did not have isolation inbuilt into those, which are simple buck boost and buck boost converters, right? So in this lecture, we are going to talk about our first isolated DC to DC converter, which is called as the flyback converter, right? So let me start drawing with the circuit of the flyback converter, and then we can go ahead and discuss about its operation. So this is how a flyback circuit can be drawn, right? Right, this is how the flyback circuit is. So it seems straightforward. There is a DC source, right, and through a switch you are providing it to a transformer, right, and then through another switch you are connecting it to the output. So as you would sort of understand, if we continuously connect a DC source to the transformer, what would happen? Let's say if we continuously connect a DC source to the transformer, right, we do it like this, then what will happen? Use Faraday's law, E equal to N d phi by dt, right? So E is always a DC constant value, so flux would continue to rise, right? So if you plot the BH curve, where B is the flux density, which is proportional to flux, and H is proportional to MMF, which is proportional to the current. So you see that this is how the curve looks like, right? And as your flux continue to rises, your current will become much more, and at one point your current flowing in this circuit would exceed the current limit of the wires or cables or whatever, and you might end up damaging the circuit, right? So this constant DC would take the transformer into deep saturation and the current becoming very large, which might end up damaging the circuit. And therefore, in the flyback converter, we provide it through a switch, right? So as to ensure that you increase the flux for some time, then there is another switch, you try to decrease the flux for some time, then you increase the flux for some time, decrease it, and sort of do that way, right? That's the basic principle what we are going to use in this flyback circuit. So let's see how it operates. Now, before going into that, the transformer which I have drawn, right, this is a actual transformer. So if you see the complete circuit of the transformer, this is how it looks like, right? This is the equivalent circuit of the transformer, with this one being the ideal transformer, right? And the full thing is the equivalent circuit of an actual transformer. Now what you can do is so what we are going to do is just to sort of simplify our understanding of the circuit. For the time being, we would assume that there is no leakage inductances, right? There is no leakage inductances, there is no winding resistances, and there is no core loss happening in the circuit. So the only non-ideality that we would consider here as of now is this magnetizing inductance Lm, right? So I would replace this equivalent circuit into this transformer, and I would redraw the circuit below. This is Lm. This is the ideal transformer, right? Let me also put dots, as per the convention, and this is the remaining circuit. Right now as of now we are only considering magnetizing inductance, but as in some of the advanced courses, or probably even in a little bit later part of this course, we might be able to consider even more non-idealities. For example, we might consider the leakage inductances also, right? Considering the resistances is also possible, and that would actually bring some losses in the circuit. But for the basic course, let's start with assuming that it's an ideal transformer plus a magnetizing inductance, right? So the most simplest possible thing. Okay, so now how does the circuit operate? Let's draw the waveforms for this circuit, right? Let me call this as switch 1, let me call this as switch 2. So again, they should be complementary. Why they should be complementary here? If you remember earlier circuits, both the switches used to be complementary, right? Here also they must be complementary. If both of them turns on together, then there is going to be a short circuit, right? How? Because let me, just to explain that, let me deviate a little bit. Let me call this as V1 plus minus, this is V2 plus minus, right? Let's say S1 is on, right? In that case, V1 becomes equal to Vin, right? And V2 becomes equal to N2 by N1 times Vn, right? You see, this law holds good even for DC also. Reason being that it is derived from the Faraday's law. So as long as transformer does not saturate, this law holds good, right? Equal to Nd phi by T, right? This is how gets derived to. So even if E is DC, still E1 upon E2 becomes equal to N1 upon D2, as long as the transformer is, this law holds good even in case when d phi by dt values are something else, because it will just cancel out, right? So yeah, this law would still hold good for an ideal transformer. so this is true. You can see that V2 becomes equal to this value, right? Now if you turn on S2, then V2 and VO will create short circuit, right? If they are perfectly matched, then it is okay, but even if they are slightly deviated, right, slightly deviated, still a large amount of current would flow in the loop, and that would damage the circuit because there is no inductance in this loop, right, between V2 and VO. So therefore S1 and S2 must be complementary, right? Implies S1 and S2 should not be turned on at the same time. Okay, now coming back to the waveform, how does, so let me just take this circuit and draw it below. Right, sorry, I have to do it again. I could have probably drawn it by this time, but let me just give it a last try. And if okay, nice, finally it worked. Right, so now what happens is when S1 is on, right, if I draw the equivalent circuit, then S1 is on, this is LM, let me represent current here as IL, right, and now this is a ideal transformer, and the secondary side of the ideal transformer is open circuit, and therefore there is no current flowing in the secondary of the ideal transformer, and therefore there is no current on the primary of the ideal transformer. Therefore the only current that flows is from the source to the magnetizing inductance, and this is actually charging, source is charging the magnetizing inductance. And if I write the equation, then it becomes VLM is equal to LdIL by dt, which is equal to Vin, right, the input voltage, and which implies that your inductor current would rise linearly, right, from an initial point to a peak value. So far so good. Now let's see what happens if I turn on S2, and obviously S1 is now off. Now S1 is off, so primary side there is nothing connected, there is this magnetizing inductance LM, and then there you have an ideal transformer, right, and this is something like this. Now the current was flowing downwards in ILM, right? So the current would continue in the same direction, it would not suddenly change the direction. So since this current is coming down, it would, let me use, yeah. So this current would flow in this direction, right? So it would exit the dot from the primary side. Now because this is an ideal transformer, right? If you remember, we have discussed this. If this is an ideal transformer, if current is leaving one dot, it must enter the other dot, right? And therefore current has to enter from this dot, and therefore in the secondary side current flows like this, and therefore it charges the capacitor with this polarity, and your output polarity is as per this, right? Right, so this is the output polarity. And now if I write the voltage equation for the inductor, right, VL M, which is this, is equal to V1, right, which was across the primary side, which is equal to N1 by N2 times V2, and if you see on the secondary side, V2 is nothing but equal to minus VO, and therefore this is equal to minus times N1 by N2 times VO, right? So this is equal to L dIL by dt. You can see dIL by dt is negative, therefore current would fall and it would come back to the same point from where it started. And this is how the inductor current waveform would look like. Okay, yeah, so now the next thing is once we have found the output voltage polarity, right, which is, now we understand it's plus in the bottom in this way, so let me mark it in the original figure also. So once we have found the output voltage polarity, right, now what is the relationship between the output voltage and the input voltage? So we can just apply Volt-Second law, right? So we can use Volt-Second law, right? And if we write it, then what is the voltage across inductor? When S1 is on, it is given by equation 1. When S1 is off, it is given by equation 2. Let's define duty cycle with respect to the switch 1. So let's define period as dTs, where the total period is Ts. Then we can write that dTs into Vin plus 1 minus dTs into what is the voltage during the second period. The voltage across inductor is minus N1 by N2 to VO is equal to 0, right? This is the voltage during first period, duration of first period plus duration of second period, voltage of second period. Let me just simplify this equation further. We rewrite it. So I can write minus times 1 minus Ts into Ts can cancel out. I can write this V0 upon V in is equal to N2 by N1 into duty cycle D upon 1 minus D. Right? This is the relationship between the output voltage and the input voltage, right? Average values of output voltage and input voltage. Let me point out one important thing here is that I assume that my inductor current starts from a non-zero value, right? Therefore, I am assuming that my circuit is operating in continuous conduction mode. It is possible to operate the circuit in discontinuous conduction mode also, right? We would not probably do it in this video, but you can think yourself how would this circuit, as the load would continue to reduce, right? Load resistance would increase, the circuit would also slowly move towards discontinuous conduction mode. So continuing our discussion for CCM, right, we derived the output to input voltage relationship, which if you see is very similar to a buck boost converter. It's D upon 1 minus D, but there is an additional term of turns ratio, secondary turns N2 upon primary turns N1. Right? How does it help? It helps us because now we can generate an output voltage, right, a very low value by setting suitable value of turns ratio, and still we can maintain duty cycle close to 0.5, which was not possible in the conventional buck converter, right? So for example, if you want output, if your input is let's say 500 volt, right, and you want to buck into 10 volt, then you can set your N2 by N1 ratio to be almost equal to 10 by 500. That would imply your duty cycle would be very close to 0.5, and still you will get a 10 volt output from a 500 volt input. So the limitation which was there with the conventional buck boost, that you cannot operate buck boost, you cannot get a much lower or much higher value efficiently. That is no longer possible. That is no longer a limitation in case of these converters, because you can continue to operate your duty cycle close to 0.5 and you can still get a very low voltage. You can even get a very high voltage. You can do from 10 volt to 500 volt, right? So turns ratio would just invert. So with suitable design of the turns ratio in the transformer, you can take care of some of the challenges which were there in the simple buck boost. Plus, it definitely you can see the circuit, it does offer isolation between the input side and the output side, right? So this does offer isolation between input side and output side. So it does take care of the limitations that we saw in the previous discussion. Now one thing is you can certainly go ahead and you can sort of derive the output voltage ripple, right? You can also derive the output to input relationship in case of DCM, right? It would be very similar to the derivation you would have done it for buck boost converter. Excuse me. Right, now one thing is you might now ask me that since we are applying DC, right, we started with that discussion, why does the transformer does not saturate, why the transformer does not saturate, right? So you have your answer, because if I draw the voltage across the magnetizing inductance, right, then I see that in the first part it is positive, in the second part it is negative, right? And therefore the transformer is not seeing a DC voltage, it is seeing an alternating voltage, it's seeing an AC voltage, and therefore the transformer in this circuit does not saturate. Although it is a DC to DC converter, but the voltage that is appearing across the transformer terminal, if you put a probe and if you see the voltage appearing across the transformer terminal, you would see an alternating voltage, and that is the reason the transformer is not saturating in this case. So that is one of the points, right? Transformer terminal voltage is AC, right? Not DC. One more thing, if you see, there are a lot of times this thing is expressed in terms of flux and not in terms of the magnetizing inductance. So a lot of literature would not actually talk about the magnetizing inductance. So the literature would talk about flux. So how would that go? Instead of writing the voltage across inductance, you would use the Faraday's law and you would write E equal to L d phi by dt, right? So if your voltage applied, E is already given in this figure, so E is positive, therefore d phi by dt is positive, so you can even plot phi, right? So phi would start, go up, and then same thing, if voltage E becomes negative, phi would decrease, right? And again the starting and the end point is the same. So a lot of times you would see that flyback is discussed and explained based on the flux in the transformer and not using this equivalent circuit which shows the inductance Lm. Both have similar justifications, similar explanations. Explaining it based on current has the advantage because you can correlate it with the equivalent circuit, right? Explaining in terms of flux also has a advantage. Let me show you what is the advantage if I go and explain in terms of flux. So let me try to make an effort to explain you the same circuit from flux perspective. Right, so I've drawn the circuit and drawn the dot conventions, right? Now this is not an ideal transformer, this is a real transformer on an actual transformer, right? And therefore I'm not drawing separate magnetizing inductance here. Let me try to explain it. So again, in terms of switch S1 on, S2 on, right, and this is period dts, right, full period is ts. So when S1 is on, we understand that the equivalent circuit would be this, right, and the secondary would be open circuit, right? So I can write E1, E2, right? So E1 is equal to N1 d phi 1 by dt, which is equal to V in, and therefore if you see the flux increases linearly, right, during this period. So I can draw the flux waveform. Let's say starts from a non-zero value and it linearly increases and goes to a certain point. And when S2 is on, in that case, I can write E2, which is equal to N2 d phi by dt is equal to minus times VO, and therefore flux decreases linearly, right, and it has to go and settle at the same time so as to ensure the operation at steady state, right? So I can again use the same principle, basic principle, that flux at the beginning should be equal to flux at the end. So flux at t equal to 0 should be equal to flux at t equal to Ts if we are operating at steady state, right? You can use equation 1 and 2, right? You can use equation 1 and 2 and you can try to find, based on this condition, the relationship between output and input voltage. You would still get the same relation, which is N2 by N1 times d upon 1 minus d. So irrespective whether you find from the equivalent circuit perspective or you go ahead with the basic flux Faraday's equation, you would still get the same relationship because the circuit remains the same. It's the way of visualizing it and understanding it. Okay, this method does offer one advantage, if you see, and that advantage is that we have got this relationship without really talking about the current. Now what happens is, how is the magnetizing current and the flux related? So if you see the BH curve, right, there are generally two things. One is that you can assume your BH curve to be linear, right? And what is B? B is proportional to flux, and what is H? H is proportional to MMF, which is proportional to the magnetizing current. So if you assume B and IM to be linear, then you can write IM, essentially what it means is mu is constant, right? So you can write IM is some constant multiplied by flux, right? If you use that, which is essentially true if you are considering linear BH curve, then you can see that in the same graph I can draw the current waveform. This is assuming linear BH curve also to be of the same nature, right? This is fine, this is simplified, but what if, because if you see the actual BH curve is not linear, isn't it? The actual BH curve would not be linear and it would have a characteristics which is saturating, right? So this is the actual BH curve which is saturating at one point of time. Then you can no longer use this equation, right? So you see, but what you understand is that in the beginning, if there is a X amount of change in flux, that would correspond to some Y amount of change in current. But as you move towards saturation, then same X amount of change in flux would lead to much more change in the current. So this is Y2, right? And using this basic principle, I can draw my current waveform as, so in the beginning my current is linearly increasing, but then as I tend more towards, as the flux value becomes more, going from lower value to higher value, the proportionality would become more and the current drawn would become higher. So current shape would look like this, and then this reverse thing would happen as you are reducing flux and coming down to zero value. So this is how your current would start look like if you are considering non-linear BH curve, right? So in practice, BH curve is obviously non-linear, so you would see a current peaking little bit in between and then settling on both sides, right? But if you ensure that you are operating in the linear region of this BH curve, then the phenomena may not be very visible, right? This phenomena may not be very visible, and what you observe is almost a current waveform, which is a triangular waveform. But if your transformer goes into more saturation, right, then you would start seeing this current spiking in between, right? The current waveform would no longer be triangular waveform, but still your formula would hold good because we have derived it from the basic principle, Faraday's law. So this peaking in current would change the current waveform but would not affect the output to input relationship, considering all the other effects are neglected, right? Right. Now, once we understand this, another thing which I would ask you guys to do is that use section 7.1, right, and do switch realization for this particular circuit, right? You try it on your own. I'll give you the result, but you have to see from the basic principle if you get the same circuit. I've done switch realization and then I've inverted the secondary side, right? And that's how you get this circuit. So you have switch S1 or MOSFET M1 and diode D2. And this is your input voltage, this is your output voltage. Just ensure that you are getting the same equivalent circuit by doing, the same circuit after doing switch realization. Okay, now with this, let's stop this particular video, and in subsequent videos we would learn a little bit more about flyback circuit, right? Although we have seen the flyback circuit, this is the flyback DC to DC converter. We would talk a little bit more about its duty cycle selection and some limitations and so on in subsequent videos.